Welcome to Strain on the Game, the podcast that reveals what it really takes to keep elite footballers performing at the highest level. I'm Stephen Warnock, former Premier League player, joined by physical performance expert Adrian Lamb. From training ground truths to the financial impact of fitness, we discuss the often overlooked challenges behind the beautiful game. Today, we're taking you inside a Premier League training week. Is it all five-a-sides and shooting drills, or a carefully crafted plan to peak on a match day? We'll break down the week, from brutal Tuesday sessions to fine-tuning before kickoffs. We'll discuss how coaches mix technical, tactical, physical and mental prep into the master plan, and how different managers put their unique stamp on it. So, if you've ever wondered how a top teams try to maintain peak performance week after week, this is the episode for you. Right, Lammy, so after we had on Mr. Dave Hancock, or should we call him Dr. Dave Hancock? Does he like that title?
Dave to his friends.
Dave to his friends. Yeah, there's been a lot of talk about the tactical periodisation training method, and I, for one, am looking forward to you explaining that to me.
Yeah, so, we thought after Dave was on, that was probably the question that we got asked most frequently, wasn't it? Because Dave made mention of José Mourinho and how he structured his training week and how different days of the week had a different theme. And part of that conversation was this buzzword of periodisation. And, what does that mean? And how does that apply to football? And I'm sure listeners will have heard the word, but what does it mean? So we thought it would be a good idea out of that episode to break down how a Premier League team structures its week, really by looking at this method that was popularised by Mourinho and has been widely adopted throughout football, which we call tactical periodisation, which is, it's just classic sports scientist, isn't it? No wonder nobody likes sports scientists, because they take these fairly obvious training words and put scientific words in them. But so, alert, there will be a little bit of, of technical language used within this, which I'll explain and try to get behind. And it's, knobhead sports science words, which we're gonna be using.
So that's coming from you, knobhead words.
Yeah,
excellent. Can't wait. Yeah, this will be good.
Very unlike me, that. But so I think the starting point. What is the overarching goal of training? What are we looking to do here? Is it just something that we need to keep the players entertained between games because there's so many games, or is there something more structured behind it? And from a physical standpoint, the purpose of training is to ensure that players are equipped to meet the physical demands of the game. And from my standpoint, they can exceed the physical demands of the game, because we're always trying to improve fitness. We're always trying to push performance upwards. So, and we've said before on a number of episodes what the physical demands of the game are, but it's worth going over them, again, just to reiterate them. From a physical perspective, football is defined as being a high-intensity, multi-directional, repeat sprint sport. And this intermittent nature of football means that players have to have well-developed capabilities in strength and speed and power and agility. And they need to have high levels of endurance to be able to recover quickly between these high-intensity activities that we know are the most important activities within football. So they need to have strongly developed areas in multiple components of fitness. And the best way of developing these physical capabilities is through well-defined, isolated phases of training or blocks of training, which are prescribed in what we call traditional periodization models.
Yeah, so sorry to interrupt you there, Lemmy. I think what's important about this side of things is that this can always make or break a player as well. So if you go to a certain club and the training methods are different, you can either make a player better, or the player can find things very difficult, and it's a very fine balancing act for the physical or the sports science department, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there's part of that when a player comes into a team and into a club, the first thing we need to establish is what training environment they've been exposed to before. You know, what type of training they've been exposed to, what are they comfortable with, what do they respond well to, and even though we try to apply scientific principles to that process, you know, sometimes it's sitting down with a player and having a conversation about them. What works well for you? You know, what kind of environment do you expect here? This is our way of doing things here, but we also are adaptable within that way of training because we want to maximize the individual player in a way that and creating a training environment which is responsive to them, you know, which within that we have that individualized ability. So, you know, when we look at these periodization models, the traditional ones, we break down the year into these phases. You know, and it's scaled according to time. So the annual plan, the full season, is what we call the macro cycle. So that's the big annual plan. And this is then broken down into component phases, which are usually 6 to 8 weeks long, which are called mesocycles. And each mesocycle has a very specific training goal. So, you know, we start with foundational, building the base, foundational work, and then we progress through different phases of training towards competition. And then within each mesocycle, they are then themselves broken down into microcycles, which are a week's training, which is what we're going to be talking about today, a weekly training cycle. So in this way, training becomes kind of like I describe it as an architectural process where big blocks of training are stacked one on top of the other in kind of a broad to narrow framework, all of it leading towards the competition phase. And a good example is in track and field athletics, where we see these athletes going through these big blocks of training, starting off with a phase that we call anatomical adaptation, which is preparing the body, the muscles, the ligaments, and the tendons for future intensive training loads. So there's a strong element of injury prevention, injury reduction around that. And then we move into strength, and then we convert that into power as we work towards the competition phase. But the difference is that track and field athletes, they only have to peak once a year, maybe Olympics once every 4 years.
Exactly, yeah.
And you know, you've been a player. You have to peak every week. Sometimes you have to peak twice a week, multiple times for 10 months. So there was always this question in football and in applied practice within football is, does periodization apply to football? And if it does, how does it? Because the main difference between football and track and field athletics and other sports, nowadays, football has got very, very short off-season periods, and they're getting shorter, as we've discussed in previous episodes.
Yeah.
Teams now, at the end of the season, in this off-season period, are jumping on an aeroplane and going off to play an off-season, end-of-season tour for commercial reasons. We also have got shortened pre-season periods. You know, the pre-season period, the focus has shifted away from physical preparation of players towards building the commercial branding of the club. So, and we've spoken about this when we did our series on pre-season, didn't we? Where clubs are jumping on aeroplanes and they're going to the United States, or they're going to the Far East, or they're going to Australia. And so what the consequence of this is that players just don't have the time to develop these physical qualities which are required for effective football performance in this traditional periodized way. You know, so And then the other thing we have to remember is that football fitness, it's different to fitness in other sports in that it's highly dependent on the technical ability of the players. So there's a technical skill component to fitness as well, but it's really dependent on the tactical environment of the club, and different clubs have got different tactical environments. And because of that, we see training being planned by coaches that emphasize these technical and tactical components, sometimes at the expense of physical development. So technical and tactical training is prioritized over physical training sometimes. So for those reasons, we had to find a different way of periodizing training because those traditional models just didn't apply. They just didn't work in a way that still allowed coaches to develop the physical and the technical and the tactical and the psychological skills of players in a structured and coordinated way. And out of that need, methodologies and training methods started to emerge towards integrating physical training within technical and tactical training in a way that emphasizes the physical component of these technical skill actions. And one of the most common of these is what we've already described as being the tactical periodization model.
So the one thing I'd say there is that when I'm listening to you, I'm listening to track and field, and I'm thinking, but this is a contact sport.
Yeah.
So you've also got to bring that side of it into the game as well, haven't you? Or into your organization and what you're doing, because although it's very easy to physically train for a session and tactically, there's contact that comes into play. So injuries are more apparent and more evident within football compared to track and field. So I can imagine there's so many different obstacles to overcome to try and get this going. But from your point of view, if you want to give us a rough overview of what it looks like then from match day minus 4 or 5?
Yeah, so we sort of work it according to let's describe it according to a weekly Saturday to Saturday schedules. So yeah, and in terms of the weekly schedule, we can describe this according to a Saturday to Saturday schedule. Yeah. It's slightly different when there's a midweek game, but we switch the training emphasis from day to day. So match day is Saturday. Match day +1 is recovery and regeneration day, or it might be a day off. On match day +2, so the Monday, we're still looking backwards towards what's just gone from the game. So players are still in a state of fatigue, and you know yourself, 48 hours after the game, you're often more tired and stiff and sore than you were the day after a game. So
yeah, definitely,
you know, the training theme then on that day is active recovery. So players will engage either in low intensity training designed to continue this process of recovery, getting your legs back, essentially, is what coaches would describe it to players. And those training sessions generally last about 45 minutes to an hour. We might do some light running. We might have an extended warm-up. There might be some light technical work, but the volume's very, very short. The intensity is very, very low. And also we've got those players who haven't played in the game to take care of as well. So after 45 minutes, the starting 11 will probably go in and do some strength work in the gym and some other types of recovery work. The subs and the players who didn't play in the game or didn't have significant minutes in the game on the Saturday, they'll stay out and do a little bit more. Following this point, match day +2, the emphasis then shifts and we turn our gaze away from what has just gone and towards what's coming. So for that reason, in a terminology sense, we stop talking about match day +1 and match day +2, and we start talking about match day -4. So that's your Tuesday. We're 4 days out from the game and we're now preparing for the game.
Yeah.
The physical objective on match day -4 is strength. So if you cast your mind back to Dave Hancock's remarks around José Mourinho, he talked about strength, not in terms of strength developed in the gym, but locomotor strength, movements which have a strong dependency on strength. So acceleration, explosive decelerations, high intensity agility movements. So training is designed on match day -4 around these type of movements. On match day -3, we shift our emphasis away from strength and we look at aerobic power and endurance. So the training emphasis is high speed running, total distance covered, high relative distance, and a lot of high heart rate, so above 85, 90% of the player's maximum heart rate. We want to expose them to that sort of work. But what we also do is we minimize the number of explosive actions that happen within that training session, because we've already covered that in the previous day. So we want to give players the opportunity to adapt and to recover from that high locomotor strength training, but we also want to expose them to a different type of training. So that's the endurance day, is match day -3. Match day -2 is a speed day. So our training objectives on there, on match day -2, is to expose players to lots of high speed running, lots of maximum sprint and high velocity actions, okay, within the context of the game model. And then on match day -1, the day before the game, the focus is on avoiding generating any fatigue that players will take into the game, but also at the same time not shutting them down so they don't go into full recovery mode. So for that reason, the objective the day before a game is activation. So lots of neural stimulation work, lots of short, sharp, explosive work, similar to match day -2, but much more condensed, much shorter, and basically it's what Nigel Pearson used to call a blast on the banjo. All right, a little short, sharp, explosive training, probably no more than 45 minutes. So we're in and out, and there may be some tactical preparation in terms of set plays and just fine-tuning the tactical model in amongst that as well.
Yes, because the way things, I mean, when I was at Blackburn, which is arguably when I say I was at my fittest, it was Monday was, like you say, a little bit of a recovery day where I was thinking, you go and you know you're not really going to do too much, so you're okay with that. Tuesday was always the difficult day for me. That was like the fitness day where you got absolutely flogged, and it was like, get yourself ready for the weekend, but you're going to hurt today and you're going to feel it. And that's going to be tough. And just listening to you there, you were talking about sort of a Wednesday or a Thursday. Well, Wednesday was always a day off if we didn't have a game midweek, or it was just Saturday to Saturday. We would get run on the Tuesday, Wednesday off. But I do remember when Paul Ince came in, he'd obviously played out in Milan for Inter Milan and been out in Italy, and they like to have a Thursday off. And I remember he came in and sort of trialed it for a bit, but players didn't like it. Players weren't overly keen on it because they felt that they didn't get that recovery that was needed after the high intensity session on the Tuesday. And then when you came in on the Friday, you were a little bit leggy, and it was more psychological than anything. But I know different managers are working in different ways now, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, players get used to working to a particular structure and a particular timetable, don't they? And we talk about adaptation, and we adapt physically to that. And you're right, traditionally we used to have Monday and Tuesday were the working days of the week. Wednesday was off, and then the focus would shift on a Thursday, Friday towards those tactical preparations. There has been a movement within that model now that teams generally have a Thursday off. Match day -2 is the most common day off now. And I think the feeling behind that is that Wednesday is a great training opportunity day because it's far enough from the game that has just been at the weekend that you don't have any residual fitness, fatigue hangover from that. And also it's far enough away from the game on the Saturday that we can work quite hard. So in some ways, having that Wednesday off is we were losing an opportunity for a training day in there. And then if you hit the players a little bit on Tuesday and Wednesday in a different way according to this model. So if we do our strength day on the Tuesday and our endurance day on the Wednesday and structure training and put the training constraints in and around that training properly, then we can have Thursday as that recovery adaptation day. What's important, and although I only had one week with Paul Ince before he left Blackburn, is what you do then on that Friday and what you have to get right. And if that Friday training session isn't short and sharp and it starts to drag on a little bit, then actually you're exacerbating that fatigue and you're taking that into the games. And sometimes when head coaches, because Friday's always the head coach's day, really, isn't it? That's like where they get their last little bits on it. The early part of the week kind of belongs to the assistant coaches and the fitness coaches a little bit more, but Friday is always the gaffer's day, and that's when he's getting his team ready. And if he's not seeing in the players the things that he wants to see, then he might keep going. He might keep going until they get it right. Yeah. And sometimes that can be very counterproductive because if a 45-minute training session ends up lasting for 2 hours, they might not do a lot within that training session, but it's time on the feet, right? And time on the feet, it's still fatiguing. And we think, oh, crap, this is where, you can probably picture the assistant coaches and the fitness coaches on the sideline looking at the watches thinking, when's this going to stop?
100%, yeah.
How long is this going to be? And you're probably looking to the sideline saying, can you stop him? Can you make this stop? Because it can drag on. And especially when the weather turns a little bit. I've seen the kit man have to be ready with bench jackets. Oh, the gaffer's going to do his walkthrough. We've got to get the bench jackets on because this could drag on a little bit. And that's, and then they're coming up, the players are coming off and they're jumping straight in the jacuzzi to warm up again.
Yeah, it's not ideal, is it?
It's not. So, managing load, if we want to call it that, and volume and intensity, it can, we have to stick to this structure and this agreed format. If this format is going to work, and there are occasions where it doesn't work and it falls down, everybody's got to be on the same page and everybody's got to have an understanding of how this system of training works. And that's why I think Mourinho has been really successful with it, because it was his model. And he was the one who was doing it. It wasn't a model that was the club's model that the gaffer had to fit into or had to adapt his training style or his coaching style to fit into. It has to come from the top. It has to come from the gaffer. And this whole model that we're talking about today was developed in the mid-1980s by a sports science professor working out of Porto University in Portugal, whose name was Vitor Frade, which...
Well done.
Well, Portuguese isn't my first language, so any of our Portuguese listeners or our Brazilian listeners, if I've completely mispronounced that, please feel free to contact us and correct me. I'm quite willing to be corrected.
I think there might be a few.
But there are, yeah. But it's influence. It's had a strong influence on a number of the Portuguese coaches that we're familiar with, who've worked in the Premier League. And since its creation in the mid-1980s, it's become one of the most widely adopted and implemented training methodologies worldwide, and its influence, this idea of tactical periodization extends beyond football and into other sports, most notably into rugby. So followers of rugby will probably be aware of Eddie Jones, who was the head coach of Australia and England, and he's now the head coach of Japan. He's a massive advocate of this tactical periodization theory and model of training within rugby. And as we've said, the key principle which underpins everything is that we talked about traditional periodization models earlier, where we've got these big blocks of training. The key principle of the tactical periodization approach is that the main components of fitness, strength and speed and endurance are adjusted and are trained in according to training days through the week, rather than these big blocks of training, because we just simply don't have the time available to the players to be able to do that in football. So that's the periodization model which is most applicable to football. So essentially what Friday did when he was developing this system of training was he reduced these big blocks down to individual days, and each day given a different physical theme. But
it sounds really daft, but it's actually very simple, isn't it?
Well, as I've said, I did say right at the very beginning that sports scientists have got this terrible habit of attaching technical terms to things that coaches have probably done for a long time anyway, and try to, there's lots of research that I see that comes out even now where it's like, well, we've done that for years, but we're just trying to, first of all, we're trying to attach evidence to it that it works and that it's appropriate, or we're trying to attach evidence and say, well, actually, this doesn't work. But we're also trying to establish a vocabulary so that when I'm talking to a coach from the States or from Sweden or from the Far East, and we're using this common terminology, there's a vocabulary so that we all understand, each other understands what we're talking about. So there is this little bit of a sports scientist getting involved again, but there is a reason behind it, and that's, and fundamentally the idea of this whole model of work, this model of how to structure a weekly training schedule is so that we have a better transfer of the physical abilities that we're developing in training into the actual match day performance. And that, that's fundamentally, again, principles of training, sports science terminology. We talk about principles of training of specificity, but we also need to consider this idea of what we call dynamic correspondence. How does the training that we do with the players correspond to what they're expected to do on match day? And that has to be dynamically, it has to be a fluid model, What I find really interesting, looking at the application of this way of working, this tactical periodization, is when we look at it through the lens of player availability and reducing injuries. Because Dave Hancock, when he was speaking about José Mourinho, he credited the way that José Mourinho trained as being a massive part in reducing or minimizing injuries and having the best players available. And that was a huge part of the success of that first Chelsea team, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Huge. And last season, when I look at the Premier League stats, and we spoke about this in a previous episode, the team that had the best availability stats in the Premier League last year were Nottingham Forest, who at the time, the manager was a Portuguese manager who applied this particular way of training. They've had, I think, 75 different managers since then. But, and other Portuguese managers that work within the Premier League, Fulham, they've generally got a pretty good availability record when you look at that across the course of the season. We can't discount Portuguese managers that have got a poor injury record. No, we're not here saying that all Portuguese managers have cracked it and they're the best ways of working, because, there are always exceptions, and people will quite rightly point and say, well, he hasn't got a good injury record and he's Portuguese. So, there are different ways of applying these models.
I was going to say, that's the biggest thing, isn't it? You still got to apply the actual method properly. If you don't apply it properly, then people will pick up injuries. So it's trial and error as to how you actually achieve it as well. The one thing I was going to say was, when I look at Nuno Espirito Santo at Nottingham Forest and the success they had, but also Marco Silva at Fulham, I think there's an element where they like working with smaller squads because they know they can keep them fit, or they think they can anyway, by training them in a certain way and making sure. But I also think, from especially Fulham's point of view, who probably aren't able to go out because of their fan base, they don't have that profit of most other big clubs have. So they've got to be a little bit more sensible with the money. Bringing in a manager who is able to keep his players fitter and have a smaller squad for an ownership is very, very clever as well, to think along those lines. So I actually credit Fulham, or think that they must have looked at that and thought, he is exactly the type of person we need for this job.
No, without question. I think more and more of clubs of that size will be looking at that player availability, and we want a manager who's effective, not only in terms of results but keeping players available. We've spoken about the economic effects of that, and you don't want to be paying players who are sat in the physio room for extended periods of time. So, and lots of things come into that. Recruitment comes into that, and you spoke there about having a smaller squad, and I think that's pertinent, because also I think we see now that staff numbers are increasing all the time as well, aren't they? We see these bigger staffs every year, more and more, and that's great from a certain perspective, because it means there's more people available to deliver to players. Where I think it presents another challenge is in communication.
Yeah.
And one of the most important aspects of this whole training principle is that all of our training has to revolve around and emphasize the importance of team strategy and team tactics. And when you've got lots of staff, the question I have is, has the team strategy, or the game model, if we want to call it that, does everybody understand that? And the more staff that we have, because everything that we do as staff has to go towards improving the ability of the players to deliver the tactical strategy on match day. Everything. So our training, our activation, our strength and conditioning work, our nutrition, our psychology, everything has to be geared around delivering that tactical strategy on match day. And the more staff that we have, the more difficult that message is to be communicated. Is everybody on board with what we're doing? And I found, as a fitness coach, moving from club to club, you can't just recreate the fitness programs that you did at one club at the next club. You have to have a real strong understanding of the way that the gaffer wants to play, because everything is specific. Training is specific. Fitness is specific around the physical demands of the game, and that is all stems from the way that we want to play. Yeah. So we have to have that understanding, both individually and as a group. And, I'm sure as a player that you found difficulty within that, or challenges within that, when you went from say, Blackburn to Villa, not only in the way that you train, but what you were being asked to do might have been different. Your job description from that point of view was description. So that meant the type of fitness that you had to develop would have to be different.
Yeah, it 100% is. And I think that's what a lot of people might not take into consideration when they're looking at players. And I think there's a number of players this season, mainly at Liverpool, because they're the ones who we all thought would kick on and continue to mount a title challenge or defend the title. But they're the ones who suffered, and they've had a lot of new players come into the squad. They've also had a change in assistant manager, not blaming him at all, but it's a new voice within the changing room, and it's a different voice. So then it's how quickly does he get up to speed? There's a lot of variables that are behind the scenes that can change things, but also the players have to adapt as well and have to adapt as quick as they can. But sometimes it does take a little bit of time to achieve those things.
Yeah, and there's lots of things that go into influencing, and we'll call it the game model, the way that, the DNA of the team or the DNA of the club and the identity of the team, and the most important thing is the playing philosophy of the head coach. And I think that's why Mourinho, going back to Dave's comments in the episode we did with Dave, why that was so successful was because everything came from him and he was a dictator and he set everything, he did all of that. But then within that chosen style of play, preferred formations, that changes according to certain game situations. There's lots of things which influence that. I think Amorim got a lot of criticism because he was so wedded to his formation, wasn't he? And
Yeah.
it wasn't being successful, but he's stuck with that and said, this is my way of playing. And sometimes that playing philosophy of the head coach, if they don't have that adaptability within them, there's strengths and weaknesses attached to that in terms of how you design the training week, which is what we're talking about mainly today.
Yeah.
But if you've got a head coach who is strongly wedded to a particular philosophy, this is the way that I play, this is the way that my teams play, then everybody knows where they stand, and the training doesn't change too much through the week, and you can plan accordingly. It's when you've got these managers who kind of try to be too adaptable and change things, that sometimes that can be problematic, can't it? In certain game changes. And I think we've seen, haven't we, this season, I've certainly seen a little bit of a backlash from construction playing out from the back. Teams, I feel like sometimes head coaches follow trends. There was a trend towards playing out from the back, and when you're developing this game model, do you have the players at your disposal who are capable of playing that way? If you want to play in a fluid attacking style, but the players aren't technically proficient enough to play that way, then does the coach adapt the playing style? And that has an influence on the type of training that we do. So everything has to come back to this tactical game model. Injuries influence that. If you've got 3 or 4 players injured who are integral to the way that we want to play, and the players that are coming in that are going to replace them perhaps can't play in that style or do that job as well, does the whole system have to change? Does our formation have to change? And we've seen it, haven't we, before, when clubs are underperforming and there's a pressure on the manager. The pressures on the managers are incredible, extreme.
Yeah, it's huge.
Yeah, and they come from multiple different areas. Do we change the way we're playing? Is there going to be how robust are we wedded to this game model, to this idea of changing? And we've gone through pre-seasons before where we spent 6 weeks preparing for a particular way of playing, and the week leading up to the first game, the gaffer's gone, right, that's not working. We're going to change
it. Yeah.
And it's a nightmare, isn't it? So, you know, the whole point of this is that as staff, as fitness coaches, I need to be really, really, really aware of what our tactical game model is and the way that we want to play, because having that job description to players means that I can assign a physical job description to players. And when I can do that, when I understand the physical outputs that are necessary to deliver that way of playing, then I can set training objectives. And we've spoken about how training is adjusted through the week on different days. We've got different emphasis on speed and strength and endurance. I can set very specific training targets for each day of the week according to the way that the gaffer wants to play. And that's really important in terms of effectively planning training through the week.
Right. I think we'll call it a day there. I think that's been very interesting to understand from your point of view how you set up tactical periodization and the training methods throughout the week to make sure that the players are performing to the highest level week in, week out. And it's been another episode of Strain on the Game. Thanks for listening. Follow us on social media and YouTube at Strain on the Game. Subscribe, like, and follow.